Chag Sameach, everybody. Happy TuBishvat. Welcome to my garden where I'm sitting in the snow under some trees with a few different types of fruit and two different types of wine in order to have what's called a TuBishvat Seder. And I want to invite you all to join me. I'm going to see if I can put my phone down here in a way that you can see me. So yes, it looks like we're in Brooklyn, but actually we're in the high hills of the Galilee near the holy city of Tzfat. And we're in the 16th century where this ritual was created. Because until then, TuBishvat was in the Talmud, but nobody really celebrated it much. Until this is what happened. 3 rabbis from 3 different places in the world. One came from Saloniki in Greece. A second came from Cairo, and a third, who was born and raised in Safed and Tzfat, they came together because they sensed a spiritual crisis in the world. They saw that there was terrible disease going around. They saw that there was political strife and people were treating each other with terrible cruelty. But what they came to realize was that actually all of these things are symptoms of a deeper crisis, which is the crisis of disunity between human beings and the earth and the natural world. And so they decided they're going to work on this unity. And like their predecessors had done hundreds of years earlier, they came together in the forest on a winter night, and they came together and they said the following words: Leshem yichud kudsha brichu ushchintei. We are here to unite the Holy One, blessed be He, with the Shekhinah, the feminine presence of the divine in the world. And the way they decided to do that was through bringing together, taking a look and examining 4 different types of fruits, because those fruits are created by the creative force in the world, but they are also an expression of the presence of God in the world as we see in nature and on the trees. And so they thought, if we examine these, we will find some type of clarity that will help us bring ourselves and the rest of the world into unity with the natural world. And so they said, we're going to start, of course, with some wine, and they're going to start with some red wine. Red, because at this point, their minds were not clear enough to see through the things separating them from each other and from the natural world. And so they said, Baruch atah Adonai, you can say this with me, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, boreh pri hagafen. And they drank. Kids, you should use grape juice. Get some red and white grape juice. And then they looked at the first type of fruit. They looked at a fruit. I got some pistachios here. But if you look at the pistachios, you will see that you can't eat the whole thing. Actually, the fruit is protected by a hard shell that you cannot eat. And so before they opened it, one of the rabbis spoke up, and this is what he said. He said, how do we know? It's a deep question. How do we know that hugging trees brings life to the person who's hugging? How do we know? And the answer was, the Torah says, Etz chaim hi lamachazikim ba. That it is a tree of life. It is a tree of life. Etz chaim, to those that hold on to it tightly. So remember that next time you feel silly when you're about to hug a tree. It's going to give you some life. And they said, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam boreh pri ha'etz. Boreh pri ha'etz. Amen. And they ate. And then then after that, they felt a little clearer. And so they added a drop of white wine into their red wine so that it would become a little bit clearer. Still hasn't changed all that much. And and before they drank, the second rabbi stood up, and he took a different type of fruit, which I got here, this kind of grapefruit-like thing called a pomelo or pomela. And as you see, what do we have here? We got a fruit with an unedible peel, and even inside it's got some inedible seeds. And so they were contemplating what that means. What does that mean, a fruit that protects itself on the inside, and even on the inside there are certain parts of itself that are protected? And then the rabbi said this: how do we know that a tree can give advice? How do you know that a tree can give advice? How do you know that a tree holds within it deep wisdom? And the rabbi said, the Torah tells us, when you come to conquer an enemy town, you may not destroy its trees. Lo tashchit et etza. Do not destroy its trees. Whatever you do, you cannot destroy its trees. And said the rabbi, Etza, its trees, can also be understood as a different Hebrew word. Etza means a piece of advice, a piece of wisdom. Therefore, we know that when you destroy a tree, you are destroying wisdom. And you are foregoing the advice, the counsel that the tree can give you. And they very carefully ate the part of the fruit that was edible, and they kept one of the seeds on the side. Here I'm keeping one, and we're going to keep it for later. See if you can find these pomelo. They have them in the supermarkets. And then they said it's time for a little bit more clarity. And they poured more white wine into the red. And then they said, it's time to drink. And they drank their third, or what are we at? Yeah, third cup of wine. I'm going to be drunk by the end of this. And then they pulled out the third type of fruit. You see, I got some apples here. And if you look at an apple, well, you can eat the peel, you can eat the inside, but you can't eat those, or we don't like to eat at least, those seeds in the middle. And the rabbis thought, what does it mean that there's a fruit that you can eat the whole thing, but you cannot eat its core? You can't eat the core of the fruit. What is that teaching us? And after a short silence, the third rabbi stood up. And he said, Az yeranenu kol hatzeyar, Az yeranenu kol hatzeyar, Yamba da di da dum dim dum digga digga dim bamba, Yamba dilya dilya bibabam. How do we know, said the rabbi, after he finished his song, quoting the book of Psalms, how do we know that trees are silent by choice? That given the opportunity and the right circumstances, a tree would sing. How do we know that a tree would sing if it were given the right circumstances, if it were living in the right moment, if it were in touch with the entire rest of creation, ourselves included? How do we know? Because the book of Psalms tells us, then the trees of the forest will sing with joy. Az yeranenu kol hatzeyar. We're not there yet. We're not at the then. But one day that then will come. Maybe even in our lifetime there will be moments in which the then will come. And we will sing, and we will see the trees singing with us. And they ate the part of the apple that they could eat. And they took that little seed and put it aside. And finally, they were starting to feel more clear. So they were ready for what's left of the white wine. That bottle was mostly empty in case you were worried. And they were ready for wine that you can see through. They were ready for the clarity between themselves and the natural world. And they were ready for the last type of fruit. I got some blackberries here. Even though they're not exactly fruit, they grow in a bush, but nonetheless, it's what we got for today. Although over there I got a fig tree, and a fig tree is a good example of the last type of fruit that they were dealing with. And if you look at the blackberry, just like if you look at the fig, there's nothing in it that you cannot eat. There's no protective shell or peel. There is no seed inside that is inedible. It's all one piece. And at that point, the rabbis grew silent because they were afraid to eat of a type of fruit that they were not sure that they had the same type of spiritual capability as. Were they ready to be totally one, to remove all of the limitations and the barriers and the inside things holding them back from becoming part of the natural world? Were they? And they grew silent and sad until finally the Ari Zal, the great lion, the leader of the group, spoke up. And this is what he said. Which tree was it that was on the tree of knowledge in the Garden of Eden? Which was it? Was it a grape tree? Was it an olive tree? Was it an apple tree? Which tree was it? No. It had to be a fig tree. It must have been a fig tree. Why? Because knowledge sits there available for us. Oneness, the type of oneness that a fig or a blackberry represents between itself and whoever consumes it, there is nothing holding it back. And in that way, knowledge can envelop us and can be at one with with the world around it and is available to us in that total, unified, and whole way. And at that moment, they all felt the courage to take the blackberry or the fig and pop it in their mouths. And they drank the clear wine. And they said, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, shehechiyanu v'kiyemanu v'higiyanu lazman hazeh. And they took those two little seeds that they had kept and they planted them in the earth. And the apple seed, they planted it inside the beginning of life, the birthday of the trees, and the beginning, we hope, of a new relationship with the natural world. We can start that by supporting environmental organizations, by recommitting ourselves to less plastic and less goods that we buy from faraway places. We can commit ourselves in a lot of different ways, and I invite us to do so. Chag Sameach, happy TuBishvat.